The crystal chandeliers of Le Petit Jardin cast a golden glow across the marble floors as Victoria Chen, the formidable CEO of Global Tech Innovations, celebrated closing a $1 billion deal. With her board members, her dark eyes caught a glimmer of silver that stopped her heart mid-conversation. There, swaying from the slender neck of a waitress, was an intricately designed pendant featuring a dragon wrapped around a pearl, exactly matching the one she had specially commissioned for her baby daughter Elizabeth 25 years ago. Before the devastating fire at St. Mary's Hospital, the young waitress Sarah Miller moved with an eerily familiar grace, her eyes the same distinctive amber shade as Victoria's late husband Thomas. Her hands trembled as she watched the girl who could have been her mirror image from 25 years ago serve tables with a warm smile that brought back memories of her own humble beginnings. Victoria gripped the edge of the mahogany table, trying to steady her racing thoughts as memories of that terrible night floated back. The acrid smell of smoke, the screaming sirens, the chaos as nurses rushed through corridors with babies in their arms. She remembered running barefoot through the hospital, still wearing her silk pajamas after receiving the midnight call that would shatter her world. The pendant had been a gift commissioned from a master jeweler in Hong Kong, the dragon representing strength and protection, while the pearl symbolized the precious new life she had brought into the world. She had placed it around Elizabeth's tiny neck, just hours before the fire, promising her baby that the dragon would always watch over her. Watching Sarah now, Victoria noticed how she tucked her hair behind her ear, exactly as Thomas used to do. The way she tilted her head slightly when taking orders, mirroring a habit Victoria herself had never managed to break. The young woman wouldn't have been more than 25, the same age Elizabeth would be if she had survived that night. Victoria observed how Sarah handled difficult customers with a gentle patience that seemed beyond her years, just as she had seen Thomas do countless times in his medical practice before his death 3 years ago from cancer, never knowing the truth about their daughter. The business celebration continued around her, but Victoria remained lost in her own world of possibility. Her CFO James Morrison was discussing quarterly projections while she studied every movement Sarah made. The girl had Thomas' high cheekbones and Victoria's own delicate hands. Even her laugh carried echoes of a family resemblance that seemed impossible to ignore. Victoria found herself remembering the day she had commissioned the pendant, working with the jeweler for weeks to create something unique that would connect mother and daughter through the years ahead. Now here it was catching the light as Sarah moved between tables, its silver surface showing the same small scratch near the dragon's tail that Victoria remembered from 25 years ago. Her mind raced through the possibilities. Perhaps there had been a mistake that night in the chaos of the fire. Perhaps someone had taken advantage of the confusion to steal her precious Elizabeth. The official report had cited smoke inhalation, but no body had ever been found. The hospital had explained this as a result of the intense heat of the fire, but Victoria had never fully accepted their explanation, spending millions over the years on private investigators who had all reached dead ends, until now sitting in Le Petit Jardin watching a waitress wear her daughter's pendant. Victoria felt 25 years of grief and questions crystallize into a singular purpose. She would discover the truth about Sarah Miller, whatever the cost. Renowned private investigator Marcus Rodriguez hunched over his mahogany desk, surrounded by walls of screens displaying security footage from the night of the hospital fire 25 years ago. His trained eyes caught something nobody had noticed before. A nurse, Helen Crawford, had accessed the nursery using an administrator's keycard exactly 17 minutes before the fire alarm was triggered. Cross-referencing hospital records revealed a disturbing pattern. On the nights Crawford worked, there were numerous cases of wealthy parents losing children to supposedly sudden complications. The investigator discovered offshore accounts showing substantial deposits coinciding with each tragic incident. As he dug deeper, Crawford's pristine employment record showed suspicious transfers between 3 prestigious hospitals, each move following a series of infant deaths or disappearances. Marcus pulled up another screen showing Helen Crawford's employment history at St. Mary's Hospital. Something about the timing bothered him. She had started working there exactly 2 weeks before the fire and transferred to Mount Sinai exactly 3 days after, yet Her references checked out perfectly, almost too perfectly. He thought, running his weathered hands through his graying hair. The investigator had seen enough cases in his 30 years of work to know when documentation looked artificially clean. Pulling up personnel files from other hospitals, he noticed the same pattern: pristine records, perfect attendance, glowing recommendations, but always short stays. Reaching for his fourth cup of coffee, Marcus clicked through dozens of birth certificates and death records from St. Mary's, matching them against public records. Something caught his eye: the hospital had reported 16 infant deaths in the 3 months leading up to the fire, yet only 12 death certificates had been filed with the state. The missing 4 cases all involved wealthy families with significant assets. Clicking rapidly through more files, he discovered that each of these families had lost children within 48 hours of Helen Crawford starting her shift. Victoria Chen's case file lay open on his desk. The photo of baby Elizabeth wearing the dragon pendant seemed to watch him as he worked. The pendant itself was a crucial piece of evidence. Marcus had already contacted the Hong Kong jeweler, who confirmed creating only one such piece. The original sketches matched the pendant Sarah Miller now wore exactly down to the tiny imperfection near the dragon's tail that had occurred during the crafting process. He pulled up Sarah Miller's adoption records, which showed she had been adopted through Happy Beginnings Agency 3 weeks after the fire, the same agency that had handled adoptions for 3 other wealthy families' children who had supposedly died at hospitals where Helen Crawford worked. Marcus' surveillance photos of Sarah showed undeniable similarities to both Victoria and her late husband Thomas. He studied footage of Sarah at work, noting how she shared Victoria's distinctive way of moving and Thomas' characteristic gestures. The DNA test would confirm what his instincts already told him, but he needed more. He needed to understand the whole operation. Pulling up bank records, Marcus traced a series of payments from Happy Beginnings Agency through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, eventually leading to accounts held by hospital administrators at each facility where Crawford had worked. Then investigators started marking locations on a digital map, creating a visual timeline of Crawford's movements between hospitals, correlating them with reported infant deaths and subsequent adoptions. Through Happy Beginnings, a pattern emerged like a spider web spreading across the East Coast, each thread connecting wealthy families, tragic losses, and Crawford's employment history. Marcus reached for his phone, knowing Victoria Chen needed to hear what he had discovered. The evidence was mounting, and it pointed to something far bigger than a single kidnapping. This was an organized operation that had been running for decades, destroying families while building a fortune on their grief. The mahogany-paneled courtroom of the New York Supreme Court fell silent as distinguished attorney James Patterson approached the bench. His reputation for handling high-profile family reunification cases preceded him. Judge Margaret Thompson, a stern woman known for her fairness in family court cases, listened intently as Patterson presented evidence of a systematic kidnapping operation that had terrorized wealthy families for decades. Sarah Miller sat rigid in her worn waitress uniform, clutching the pendant that had been her only connection to a past she never knew existed, while Victoria Chen watched from across the room, her designer suit a stark contrast to her daughter's attire, yet their identical postures and mannerisms spoke volumes about their shared DNA. Patterson moved with measured steps across the polished floor, his silver hair catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows as he began presenting the evidence that would shake the foundations of the adoption system in America. Behind him, a projector displayed photographs of the dragon pendant, first around baby Elizabeth's neck in a hospital Polaroid, then around Sarah's neck in her current waitressing job, the identical scratch near the dragon's tail visible in both images, serving as silent testimony to their connection. The attorney proceeded to lay out a timeline that connected Helen Crawford's employment history with a string of suspicious infant deaths and subsequent adoptions through Happy Beginnings Agency. Sarah watched with growing horror as her entire life story unraveled before her eyes. The humble Connecticut home she had grown up in, the woman she had called mother for 25 years, the stories about her biological parents dying in a car crash, all of it carefully constructed lies designed to hide an unthinkable truth. Across the courtroom, Victoria Chen gripped her leather briefcase, her knuckles White as she fought to maintain her composure, while Patterson revealed how the hospital fire had been deliberately set to destroy records and create chaos, allowing Crawford to smuggle Elizabeth, now Sarah, out among the confusion. Judge Thompson leaned forward, her reading glasses perched on the edge of her nose, as Patterson presented financial records showing how Happy Beginnings Agency had charged desperate couples exorbitant fees for quick adoptions while making substantial payments to hospital staff, including administrators and security personnel, who had helped facilitate the scheme. The evidence showed a complex network of offshore accounts, shell companies, and falsified documents that had allowed the operation to continue undetected for over 2 decades, affecting hundreds of families across multiple states. Victoria watched as her daughter unconsciously mirrored her own nervous habit of tucking hair behind her ear, the simple gesture bringing tears to her eyes that she quickly blinked away. Sarah had grown up just 3 hours away from her biological mother, while Victoria had spent millions searching worldwide. Never imagining her daughter was so close, Patterson continued his presentation, showing how Crawford had used her position as a trusted nurse to identify wealthy parents, then orchestrated tragic accidents or sudden complications that would separate them from their children. The courtroom remained captivated as Patterson revealed the systematic way Crawford and her accomplices had targeted families, building trust with parents during their hospital stays only to exploit their most vulnerable moments. The attorney presented evidence of similar cases spanning multiple hospitals where Crawford had worked, each following the same pattern: wealthy parents grieving children they were told had died, and middle-class families paying premium fees for suspiciously quick adoptions through Happy Beginnings. Sarah felt the world spinning as she realized her adoption had cost her parents their life savings, money that had actually gone to the people who had stolen her from her true family. Helen Crawford wheeled into the courtroom, her once commanding presence diminished by age, yet her eyes held a defiant gleam as she faced her accusers. Her testimony revealed a complex web of corruption involving hospital administrators, social workers, and underground adoption agencies. She spoke of a twisted moral code, believing she was saving children from the emotional neglect of wealthy parents by placing them with middle-class families who desperately wanted children. Prosecutors presented evidence of her lavish lifestyle, funded by grieving parents who had paid substantial adoption fees, believing their chosen children were orphans. Meanwhile, Sarah listened in horror as the woman she had called mother for 25 years detailed how she had orchestrated the hospital fire to cover her tracks. The prosecuting attorney, Diana Martinez, approached Crawford with measured steps, her heels clicking against the courtroom floor as she held up a photograph of baby Elizabeth wearing the dragon pendant. Crawford's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady as she admitted to noticing the unique piece of jewelry that night, describing how she had considered removing it but decided keeping it might provide comfort to the child. She claimed she had chosen Sarah specifically because Victoria Chen was always working late, showing up at the hospital only for brief visits, yet hospital records displayed on the courtroom screen proved Victoria had spent every possible moment with her daughter, even conducting business meetings from the hospital room. Sarah felt her world crumbling as Crawford described the night of the fire, how she had waited until the night shift began when security was minimal and most parents had gone home. She detailed using stolen security codes to access restricted areas and placing small fires at strategic points throughout the hospital, ensuring chaos would mask her true intentions. The wealthy CEO, Victoria Chen, had been an ideal target, Crawford explained, her voice taking on a bitter edge, because such a busy, powerful woman would surely neglect her child. Victoria gripped the wooden barrier separating her from Crawford, her face a mask of controlled fury, as her former success was twisted into a weapon against her maternal love. Crawford continued, describing how she had built a network of corrupt officials and desperate couples, maintaining her operation through careful documentation and strategic moves between hospitals. When suspicions arose, she revealed how she had selected adoptive families, choosing those who could pay substantial fees while appearing financially strained enough to avoid scrutiny. Sarah remembered her adoptive father working 3 jobs to pay the adoption fees, While Crawford now admitted to using that money to fund vacation homes and luxury cars, her charitable image in this small Connecticut town had been carefully crafted to hide her true nature. The courtroom fell silent as Crawford described other cases, her voice taking on an almost proud tone as she detailed how she had created new identities for the stolen children. She spoke of Elizabeth Chen becoming Sarah Miller as if discussing nothing more significant than changing clothes. Hospital security footage played on screens showing Crawford carrying a bundle through service corridors. During the fire, the dragon pendant clearly visible around the infant's neck. Sarah touched her own pendant unconsciously as she watched her entire identity unravel before her eyes while Victoria Chen sat perfectly still, her face showing years of pain finally finding explanation. Crawford's testimony took an unexpected turn as she began describing her own childhood in foster care, claiming it had shaped her belief that wealth corrupted parenting. Her voice cracked for the first time as she spoke of watching rich parents she believed were too busy for their children while desperate loving couples waited years to adopt. Sarah watched the woman who had raised her transformed from the loving mother she knew into someone unrecognizable. Speaking of love and protection, while describing calculated kidnapping and extortion, Victoria's attorneys exchanged knowing looks as Crawford unwittingly revealed details that would connect her to dozens of other unsolved cases. The courtroom buzzed with tension as forensic expert Dr. Emily Santiago approached the witness stand, her credentials as one of the nation's leading DNA analysts appearing on the overhead screen. She began presenting evidence that showed an unprecedented 99.9% genetic match between Victoria Chen and Sarah Miller. The expert testimony revealed rare genetic markers shared between them, including a unique hereditary trait affecting eye color that had been documented in Victoria's family for generations. Matching photos of Sarah throughout her childhood showed the same distinctive amber eyes that had marked the Chen family line. Financial forensics expert Michael Chang followed with a devastating presentation showing how the adoption ring had accumulated millions through their scheme, tracking money through shell companies and offshore accounts that led back to Helen Crawford and her conspirators. His analysis revealed a complex network of transactions, each adoption payment carefully laundered through multiple accounts before being distributed among the conspirators. Records showed Crawford alone had amassed over $12 million over 2 decades, while the adoptive family struggled under massive debts incurred to pay her fees. De Santiago returned to present additional DNA evidence, this time revealing genetic matches between other missing children and wealthy families who had lost infants at hospitals where Crawford worked. Photographs appeared on the court screens showing striking resemblances between separated family members. As Sarah watched, she saw her own story reflected in dozens of others, each case involving a distinctive family heirloom or identifying mark that Crawford had chosen to keep rather than discard, believing such items would comfort the stolen children. Security expert Marcus Chen, no relation to Victoria, presented enhanced footage from the night of the fire showing Crawford moving through the hospital with practiced efficiency. The timestamps revealed her systematic movements as she triggered small fires in precisely calculated locations, creating a choreographed chaos that would ensure maximum confusion while minimizing actual danger to the building or its occupants. The footage showed her entering the nursery with an empty bag and leaving with a conspicuous bundle, the dragon pendant clearly visible in several frames. The prosecution presented hospital records showing Crawford had accessed the nursery using stolen administrator credentials 17 times in the weeks before the fire, each instance corresponding with hers. Studying the routines of wealthy parents and their infants' employee schedules revealed how she had manipulated shift changes to ensure minimum staffing during her planned operation, while maintenance logs showed she had deliberately disabled certain security cameras and fire alarms in preparation. Victoria Chen watched intently as her private investigator Rodriguez presented his findings, showing how Crawford had used her position to identify potential targets, focusing on wealthy families, especially those with prominent positions or demanding careers that she could later characterize as neglectful. The evidence revealed how she had studied Victoria's schedule, noting board meetings and late nights at the office, building a false narrative of maternal neglect that she would later use to justify her actions. Sarah felt tears rolling down her cheeks as she realized how long Crawford had planned her kidnapping, meticulously orchestrating every detail while pretending to be a caring nurse to her biological mother. Helen Crawford's high-powered defense attorney, Jonathan Wells, attempted to construct a narrative of benevolent intervention, claiming his client had saved children from emotional neglect. His carefully crafted defense shattered as former hospital staff members testified about witnessing Victoria's daily visits to baby Elizabeth, describing how the young mother would spend hours reading, singing, and showing photos of their home to her infant. The crucial testimony came from retired nurse Maria Gonzalez, who remembered Victoria placing the distinctive dragon pendant around her baby's neck the day before the fire, saying it would always connect them even when apart. Sarah clutched her pendant, tears streaming down her face as she heard the story of its origin for the first time. In the judge's chambers during recess, Victoria and Sarah sat across from each other, both women unable to speak as years of lost memories, hopes, and dreams hung between them. Sarah learned of her mother's relentless search, her yearly dedication of millions to missing children organizations, and the bedroom in her mansion, kept ready for 25 years, decorated for each age. Elizabeth would have been. Victoria discovered her daughter's struggles through college, her 3 jobs to make ends meet, her volunteer work at homeless shelters, and her dreams of starting a foundation to help underprivileged children. Their conversation was interrupted as Helen Crawford requested to speak with them, her confession revealing a deeper conspiracy involving human trafficking and baby selling that spanned continents. Judge Thompson's voice resonated through the packed courtroom as she delivered a landmark verdict that would change adoption laws across the country. Helen Crawford received 25 years in prison, one for each year she had stolen from Victoria, and Sarah. The hospital administrators involved were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, while the facility itself was ordered to pay hundreds of millions in damages to affected families. Sarah held her mother's hand as they listened to the judge order the creation of a national database to help identify other victims of adoption fraud. Victoria squeezed her daughter's fingers, knowing their story would help countless other families torn apart by similar schemes. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of global tech innovations as Victoria and Sarah Chen stood together, presenting their new Missing Hearts Foundation to the board of directors, their matching silver pendants catching the light as they outlined their mission to reunite families separated by adoption fraud and support ethical adoption practices. Sarah had completed her business degree with her mother's support and now served as the foundation's executive director, their shared determination to help others evident in every initiative they launched. Across the hall, Helen Crawford watched the news of their foundation's success from her prison cell, understanding at last that her actions had not only stolen years from families but had robbed her of witnessing the incredible woman Sarah had become. Despite her interference, the dragon pendants that had brought mother and daughter together now symbolized hope for countless other families still searching for their missing pieces.